everywhere in the world would like that their societies be properly governed. And what is interesting about this is that when you look at the outcomes of good governance and the outcomes of poor governance, you can see the huge gap. When you look at the economic league table of countries, or you look at the fragile state index, you would see the difference between societies that have been governed well and the societies that have been poorly governed. And so when you look at the economic league table of countries that have been governed well, you would find that they are the ones at the top of the league table. Societies that have not been governed well are at the bottom of the economic league table of the world. When you look at the fragile state index, you would find that societies that have been poorly governed are at the top of the fragile state index. That is, they are the masters of the league table of fragile states. And the ones that have been well governed are at the bottom. So it inverses, right? What does that suggest to us? It suggests to us that no society wishing to do well by its citizens can avoid good governance. For any individual to be given the responsibility of solving the problem of policy, of institutions, of investment, that person must have three things that were non-negotiable. They must have character, they must have capacity, they must have competence. You couldn't just have two of them and be trusted to deliver on anything. You had to have the three of them in equal measure. Because that way, you would not be a leader who is a low cost. Because with competence and capacity and no character, the leader would be a low cost. That's why you get all of these value derogation being the basis of poor governance, even when people are technically sound. So if somebody is technically sound, but they have zero character, they would be a low cost on the public good. And the only thing that locusts do is erode, they destroy. Or the person's got all the character in the world, but lacks competence and capacity. That person would just be a nice person. They would not be able to assemble the complexity of thought that is required to organize the group resource required to govern. Or the person has capacity, but they don't have competence and they don't have character. What would happen is that the person would be a bulldozer. But in terms of character and competence, they have nothing going for them. Because capacity is just that state of capacity, that place where you are capable of not being daunted by any situation that you must deal with. So nothing phases the person. You tell the person that, we have 10 problems that have emerged in the country today. The person is not falling to pieces or coming out and then crying so that we can all cry along. We didn't elect you to cry. We elected you to solve problems. So I have given you this journey so that we can understand whether you and I are talking about governance in the way that we can both relate. We can all relate. Am I in the room where people now understand my own idea of governance?
Yes.
So when you look at this divergence in performance, what has it meant? What it has meant is that whereas Nigeria is struggling with a high percentage of its population stuck in poverty after the 5 decades of starting off at nearly at par with Singapore, Singapore is now part of the higher upper income countries. So that the issue of being a citizen from a prosperous and stable society is not what worries the Singaporean citizen. But that's what worries the Nigerian citizen. The indication of the possibilities for the Singaporean segments of their population, whether it's their women are at a level where their gender score is almost 80, showing that there's a level of gender parity that is being achieved. Gender inclusion is not a problem for them. You look at the segment of their population called young people, it is pretty high. There is no youth exclusion in policy, in institutions building, in the investment process. Now, what all of this suggests is that Singapore has been very effective in deploying its human capital. Because the basis of the progress of Singapore is not natural resources. Everything that it has achieved in the optimization of human capital. And because it has optimized human capital, we must then say to ourselves, if its gender record is good and still improving, and its youth inclusion record is high and still improving, then we must scrutinize our own also. When you scrutinize our own, ours says to us that the median age of the Nigerian population is about 18.2. 18.2. The definition of the young in Nigeria is 18, anyone between the ages of 18 and 35, I think, except if they've changed it again. Now, the data that we have says to us that almost 60% of our population fall in that catchment. So if we are in the bottom of the gender table, it says we're not utilizing our women well enough. If we are at the bottom of the youth inclusion table, it also says that we're not utilizing our young people well enough. Well, data also tells us the story of that use. What data says to us is that the young people are trapped in poverty in our society. Of the 60% poor, according to the Bureau of Statistics data of 2011, of that 60% of poor, majority are young people and women. Young people and women. And then you look at the fact that general unemployment rate is something of 18% for unemployment, and then for underemployment, some 22 or thereabout percent. And then you look at the youth unemployment, not adding underemployment, is 40%. So youth unemployment is 40%. Youth underemployment would be something, if we even took the data of the general, that would be 22%, right? If you added underemployment to unemployment, it would give you something of about 62%. So what it shows is that only about 38% of your young who form the basis of productivity and competitiveness in nations is being deployed for your development. There is no way you are going to get the results of good governance with such data. So what that said then, youth in governance must really be looked at from the premise of what is it that youth in governance would do differently to achieve the outcome of a Singapore, or better than that. What two things that I have brought for you is that number one, youth can become the purveyors of good governance because they now understand that the worst beneficiaries of poor governance fall within their cluster. So, in terms of self-interested advocacy, the youth must understand that enlightened self-interest should push them to be the ones demanding for good governance of the Nigerian society. Number two is that the youth could then say, what is it about the context in which I am a youth that could deliver an entirely different pathway to development for Nigeria? It's at that point in time that youth would say that we're actually youth for the generation that ushers in the fourth industrial revolution. So that Africa missed the agrarian revolution, missed the industrial revolution, became a participant as a consumer of the third revolution known as the ICT revolution. But we're in the second machine age. And the second machine age is the age of the robotics and the artificial intelligence and the big data and simulation science and everything that you say about Internet of Things, blockchain technologies, the algorithms, the machine learning. It's an entirely different world. And that this world could go to any country that applies itself to the adroitness of understanding how to position their young people to be productive and competitive. So if the youth got to that place of understanding that it is another revolution and that it could go to any part of the world that positions itself properly, then what the youth would do is that the youth would say, we want to disrupt governance. And the way to disrupt governance is to not only stay at the place of demanding for good governance, but actually entering the space to offer good governance. In order to enter the space to offer good governance, the youth must then become people who are saying, you cannot be a disruptor if you are merely a substitute of what you hated.